All right, we are live. Thanks for tuning into the Sheet Metal Shaping Podcast, where we discuss the pursuit of sheet metal shaping education through traditional coach building techniques. My guest today on the show, so excited for this, Minnesota's very own Mr. Chris Runge. What's up, man?
Hey, how's it going?
I'm so excited to have you here. This is truly an honor for me. I've been following your stuff for a long time. Thank
you very much. I appreciate it.
This is great. For the folks at home, tell them a little bit about yourself. Let's kick it off there.
Well, I am a self-taught coach builder, a lot of trial and error, not born in Minnesota, but raised in Minnesota, and just lifelong car enthusiast, always creating, from a very young age, from skateboard ramps to, got into snowboarding pretty heavily and ended up doing some design stuff with that. And then, customizing cars and it got a little out of hand in about 2012. And now I pretty much design and build the cars from the ground up.
Wow. And your stuff is so spectacular too. Like even we were talking just before the show, but your behind you there, all the riveted aluminum panels, like your garage door even looks tried and true to the cars that you built. Like it's incredible.
Well, thank you. Yeah. One thing about the garage doors, I had this big idea to design and build my own garage doors for the shop, and I would never do that again.
No, too much work.
huge undertaking. Yeah.
So funny. Let's talk a little bit about the progression of your cars. So over the years, you said you started, building your own cars, designing your own cars. Where did this all begin?
Well, I've always been interested in automotive design from a young age, and really quirky cars, kind of like the Citroen 2CV, Volkswagen Beetles, 914s, 911s, just kind of that style of automotive design. And it really, this kind of got started in 2010, 11, and 12, after living down in Florida for a while and attending Amelia Island Concord Elegance. I got to see some of those hand-built raw aluminum cars in person, and I was just kind of enamored with them. Yeah. And it also reminded me of a book on Porsche called Excellence Was Expected, where there's a small portion of the book that features the post-war German hand-built race cars. And so I read that when I was pretty young, like 15, 16 years old. And so I was aware of some of these cars, but then getting to see them in person in, 2009, 10, around there, I really thought, man, how cool it would be to try to find one someday. Never thought about building one. And I knew I couldn't afford, to go out and buy a 550 Spider or something like that. But if you could find an old aluminum race car, that would be so cool. Well, in 2011, I was going to pick up a 1967 Porsche 912 in South Dakota, and one thing led to another, and it was the classic story of the widow who lost her husband, and she had barns full of old car parts and an Englishwheel and metal shaping stuff. And I was like, okay, this is amazing.
I want it all.
Yeah. And I'm like, only have, a set amount of money. And so she's like, well, if you'll put it to good use, I'll sell you what you're interested in. And so I think I had 2 or 3 24-foot trailer loads of stuff, car parts, some tools. But that kind of got me started. And what's funny about that, the stuff that I bought, if someone were to come and ask me today, should I buy this stuff? Is it a good starting point? I would probably be like, there's a lot of junk in there. But love is blind, right? So I was like, this is it. This is how I'm going to finally hammer out my first aluminum body. And, brought it back here, and I had another job at the time, so it was just a hobby for me. It always had been kind of a hobby working on cars. I set it up in our old barn where I grew up, had one lane down the main floor of the barn, and as time allowed, I would just collect parts and kind of, get this vision going of how I was going to build the first car. So with my research and with with that book, Excellence Was Expected, I fell back on the Glockler cars, which were the kind of the birth of the Porsche competition cars after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And so looking at the layout, the design, the wheelbase, those reminded me a lot of the Formula V, which is a Volkswagen open-wheeled racing series that's been around since 1956 or 7, if I remember right. And Formula Vs are super affordable, super cheap to get into. And that was the route I went for the underpinnings to start the first build off of.
Wow. That's amazing. And you know what? Even that line, excellence was expected, is just like, it just grabs you.
Yeah. It's a fantastic book. And it's so Porsche.
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm sure, like, just from that line alone, I'm sure that would have really tailored the way that you were thinking about some of these cars. Because I mean, if Porsche is saying excellence was expected, and you're saying, hey, I want to be along these lines, that by nature just drips onto you.
Yeah, it is. It's something that my dad, growing up, I always watched him. There was kind of the unspoken rule was leave things better than you found them.
Yeah.
He was always restoring, always fixing and refurbishing things. And so it was just like in our blood to get something and fix it up and make it better. When I was a kid, like, our favorite thing to do was go to the junkyard and find stuff we could fix.
Nice.
That's what we did,
Do you remember that TV show called Junkyard Wars? It was like 20, 30 years ago.
Yes, vaguely.
Yeah, I think it started in England and then it came over to, North America, and these two teams would like go out into the junkyard and like gather all the stuff and like build go-karts and dirt bikes and stuff. And I mean, I remember the show growing up, but it was exactly like what you're describing. Go out there, find something, make it amazing again, make it run, make it beautiful, whatever, whether it's art or machinery or whatever. It's just cool to say, hey, I built that.
Yeah.
I refurbished that, whatever. Right.
Yep. For sure. We would, there would be 1 or 2 city scrap days in the little town I grew up in. So in town, everyone would put their scrap metal out to the curb. And then that junkyard was like two miles from my house. So we knew what day that was. And a lot of people would go pick in town, and get it off the curb. But a lot of it would end up at the junkyard. And that's where we would go and find all these treasures, old bikes, Schwinn apple crates, orange crates, like the old chopper bikes.
Yep.
All kinds of stuff. You wouldn't believe what you'd find there back in the 80s and early 90s.
And when were you born? What year?
1980.
Right on. So like you had some good time there for picking, no doubt.
Yeah, for sure.
Who did you learn from? Who trained you?
For like fabrication, metal shaping.
That's right.
I've never been formally trained. Yeah, I'm just self-taught. Now, my uncle, when I think about who inspired me and who was around in the family. So my dad was in construction. He was an electrician. He still is an electrician, kind of semi-retired. So there's that mechanical side with building and architecture. And when I was a teenager, I did everything from shingling to framing, building homes, some electrical work. My uncle was kind of the hot rodder, and he also worked with my dad. He did the plumbing and heating. So I was around that type of work. But the only welding that I had ever really done was MIG welding, like building skate rails and snowboard rails, for snowboard parks.
Yeah.
I'd never done any really fabrication for vehicles. But I just kind of grew up around the tools and the guys who, my uncle was always working on cars and fixing them up. But really, when I got those tools from South Dakota with the Porsche 912, that's when I was like, okay, I got to learn everything I can. So the first car, my first one, that whole aluminum body was welded with a MIG welder.
Wow.
With a spool gun.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was crazy. So I would weld like 1 inch at a time, then let it cool, go down a little ways, weld on the body seams. And oh my gosh, it was crazy, man.
Wow. I'm sure you've learned a few things from then to today.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've had somebody ask me if they thought, like, if I had been formally trained, where would I be now?
Yeah.
In my mind, I like the path that I took, having to figure all this stuff out and so many mistakes, just trial and error. And I think there's definitely value in having formal training, but the path that you're on with just passion and determination, and what it teaches you is a beautiful thing if you can stick with it. It's just
Absolutely.
not easy.
What do you think you may have missed out on over the years by not being formally trained versus what do you think some of the benefits of the upside might be?
Yes. So, what I missed out on, well, definitely, the path that I would take to come to a landing point on a finished product was like just all over the place, trying to figure it out. Where I think being formally trained, you may not get all the why nots. Like, this is why you don't do it that way. Don't do it that way. Don't do it that way. This is why you do it this way. So I think you kind of have that, direct path to quality product and technique, which is a huge time saver. For me, though, as a person and like just where I was at with life, I think the path I took was absolutely what needed to happen. Taught me more patience, helped me. Like, I love the thing that happens with building these cars, that you always start at center. And then, so like with my chassis design, I start at the center, work my way out, each side, and you always build off this balance. And that's like a life lesson for me, it's finding that balance with your body work. It's the same thing, finding the symmetry. And so there's a lot to it, to me, that goes into like the zen of coach building, right?
The zen.
Yeah. But I don't think you would get a lot of that. I think you might lose some of the heart and soul of that learning process,
right,
that helps you grow as a person when you're just formally, I shouldn't say just formally taught, but when you are formally taught.
For sure. Let's take those skills and let's pivot to all the models that you've built over the years. How many models of vehicles have you produced from inception to today?
So the ones that I call Rungi would be the Flyer, which was my first one, and then the Flyer as a coupe. So it's a roadster and a coupe. The RS as a roadster and then as a coupe. The R2, which I've only built as a coupe, but I do have it designed as a roadster. And then the Valeno, which was based off a Dodge Viper. But we still I call that my own design because it's just so radically different than the Viper. And there's a couple others in there that I've built that I didn't really call Rungis. They were built on existing like race car chassis and things like that.
Yeah. And in terms of design, like you're coming up with this stuff from scratch. Like these are scratch built cars.
Yeah. So my design is clearly inspired by, I would say, an era and by, the great cars of the era. So like the Maserati 300S, the Porsche RSKs. But when you look back at the Eigenbau or home built cars of post-war Germany, they did kind of resemble this certain aesthetic it was there, but it wasn't like anyone was copying necessarily another maker. But there was a lot of cars that it was like, oh yeah, that's a German post-war racer, and that was kind of my vision with the first one, was like, well, what if I built my own car that would kind of be like the one you would find in a barn, and I had this whole like fantasy going about it as building it,
This is your barn find all coming back to you now, right? This is it. Tools to cars. In terms of this design, like when you got started, were there any, if you could say like, these are the three key things that really set me on the path, what would those three key things be in terms of importance on how you came up with the shape?
With the shape? Well, definitely the influence from post-war German racers, specifically the Glocklers. That was one of my main inspirations. And in the series of Glockler cars, there were several variations, but you could kind of tell there was a common thread through all of them.
Yeah.
So that would be one of the main factors in the aesthetic design. I guess my mind, second thing it jumps to is building the buck. I'd never built a buck before, but looking at the photos again in that book, Excellence Was Expected, it looked a lot like the skateboard ramps I used to build as a kid. Like
half pipe.
yeah, exactly.
Like,
Yep. And it's funny, the barn that I built the car in the hayloft as a kid, we had a vert ramp up there.
Nice.
So there was a lot happened in that barn over the years. But yeah, that was the second thing, was like, it to me was kind of had a lot of the same, ideas as building up the framework of skate ramps. And the third thing that comes to mind was just like with the shaping and with the welding. I mean, the English wheel I had was a Harbor Freight anvils. It was a homemade frame with I-beam, and it was crazy, super rigid. It was a fantastic machine. I know I sold it to a guy who's not far from me, and maybe someday I'll have to buy it back from him just to have it. But
it's a history piece. Yeah.
Yeah, the Harbor Freight English wheels. I realized it's like toward the tail end of building the car, they had the machining grooves still in the surfaces of the wheel. So as you're wheeling the metal through, those grooves are actually like ribs that are grabbing the metal and not letting it expand and spread out like it's supposed to. So one day I kept seeing these grooves in all my panels, and you can see them if you look back at the photos of FF001. There's like lines, not your normal wheeling marks, but like grooves in it. And one day I thought, man, I'm going to go over. Our next door neighbor was kind of a home machinist, and he had a lathe. So I went over there and knocked on his door with all my anvils. And I said, can we smooth these things out? I want to get them polished. We polished all the anvils, came back over to the barn and started wheeling. And like all of a sudden you had this beautiful finish, and just, the metal formed very, very much more quickly and very smooth after just getting the milling or machining grooves out of the anvils. There's just so many little things that you learn along the way. And I think there's like an innocence to it, because I knew really nothing, and such excitement. A lot of times, like, you almost have to go back and tap into that now, doing this for 11 or 12 years, when it's like you're just feel like you're barely like getting by, trying to get work done and answering to customers. Now it's still a blast, but now it's business.
I want to talk to you closer to the end of the show about Chris Runge, the artist, versus Chris Runge, the businessman, because they're very different skill sets, right?
Sure.
To make that so. But to finish up on design, I want to quote your website: "Art in motion and timeless by design." Those are two things that when you sign on your website, that's the very first thing you see. Why did you pick those two?
That's a great question. Art in motion. So I think it's kind of self-explanatory, but there's probably a little bit of more depth to it. The way that I view the cars, and first of all, I never really thought of myself as an artist. So that's the first thing, until like probably 4 or 5 years ago. I got to bring the cars out. Let's see. Yeah, it was probably 6 years ago. Bring the cars out to California. And to me, like an artist, it's an honorable thing. But to me, I was like, man, I want to try to do this for a living, and artists don't really make any money till they're dead. So I had this conundrum, like, how could you actually be an artist and just support yourself and do what you love, Sure. But I brought the cars out to California, and several people had come to these events from all over the US, and people's reactions to the cars were just, it blew me away. Like they followed the journey, and I'm kind of in this whirlwind, just trying to, like I said, keep above water, and other people are so inspired by the work that it's really humbling. And there was a lady and her husband who said they'd come from hundreds of miles away to see the cars in person, and she was in tears looking at it and pointing out like how the handmade marks and the hammering, and her father was into race cars, and they were just enamored with the work. And
it's cool.
It blows my mind. So that's kind of when I started to accept, like, okay, maybe there is an artistic element to it. And then the motion part of that question, I think it's cool because, so the third car was the first one that I left in raw aluminum. Number 1 and number 2 were painted. All the rest since have been raw. And that's
a skill evolution thing, or was there a reason for that?
Yeah. So the reasoning, I thought, this is going to take me a lifetime to master this. And I would like, first of all, I thought about my kids and grandkids. If I stick with this, I would like someday, like my grandkids, if they could see all the cars and be like, well, that's where he started. And this is, toward the end, or if the name lives on, who knows where it'll go. But then you could see the evolution of the growth of the work and the artistry. And at the same time, like I said, just the personal growth that has taken place for me as a man, it is a personal side of it that I cherish and I value a lot. What was the second part of your question?
You were talking about polished cars. Your first two were painted and the rest were polished. And I'd say that was that a progression of skills? Like when you're first getting started, like a little bit of body filler probably went a long way at that point versus today. These things are mirror finishes and they're art. They're beautiful.
Yeah. And the other cool part about that was that, my uncle, who was the hot rodder and who helped me paint the first two cars, had so much fun doing that with him. And he sadly has passed away. He was diagnosed with cancer a couple of years ago, but, I told him he always wanted to paint with me. And so we did the first two, but I told him I'm going to leave it raw. And he was just like, you're nuts. You're like leaving yourself wide open. People are going to, they're going to criticize you. And it's like, I'm fine with it. Like the personal growth part again, I don't care. I don't care what anyone thinks. Like, this is just my thing. If a customer wants to pay for a polished or just raw aluminum car, that's what I want to do. And people have done it and supported it. And they get to buy a piece of the story, of that evolution.
Yeah. Well, this is going back to let's talk about the progression of your models. Like all of the different cars that you've done, every car has, a new story and your skills get better and the cars get more refined and the bodies get more perfect. And like all of the things that you're doing, your skills compound, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the pursuit of excellence and that growth as a craftsman that you're, always trying to better yourself. It also, another thing that I did not, it kind of caught me blind a little bit. Cause in the beginning I was like, well, once I get good at this, it's going to go way faster. And the thing is, once you get good, the better you get, the more picky you are.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, I thought for sure, the next one's going to go quicker. It just isn't so. You're more critical of yourself. People's expectations are higher. The pressure is higher. And it's funny because a lot of people go back. They're like, dude, your first two builds are my favorite. And those are the most raw.
Right.
So who knows?
How did your notoriety change after you were on Jay Leno? What happened there?
I think there was definitely a lot more awareness. Without a doubt, there was a lot more awareness about what I do and the work, and people wanting to get into it, which was ultimately, that was one of the main reasons I went on the show, because what it's done for me, this type of work, coach building and designing, it's just been such a blast. And anyone that has an interest in it, I think should get into it on some level, So that Jay's show really helped that and raise awareness about the craft.
Do you think it helped put you on the map as a modern day coach builder, like as Rungi cars, or do you think that you were already on the way and that just helped flourish it even bigger?
It definitely helped, no doubt about it. There's a couple other things that helped, which caught me by surprise as well. Classic Driver is a publication from, I think, the UK or in Europe somewhere. And they did a really beautiful story on the work. And that really, globally after that, raised a lot of awareness about my work and people contacting me, asking how they could get into it. So, I'm responding to emails, trying to connect them with local coach builders where they can take classes, to support the local economy. And super cool.
So this wasn't just a Rungi cars thing. This was you're helping draw awareness to the craft itself.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, before we started recording, I don't really, I obviously want to stay in business, but I have so much work right now. And from the beginning, it's always to me been about the craft,
Right.
That's the big thing. just because it's so fascinating and it's just so important. I think, I think that with the takeover of so many automated technologies and computers and even the phones we're recording on, that there has been, I think we've lost an important element, obviously, in the mechanical and, people really getting their hands dirty and building stuff from scratch. And so much so that I think that there is a lot of inventions and ingenuity yet to be discovered within mechanical hands-on type of building.
Yeah.
That the computers just kill that. The soul, the heart, it's cut off when you have computers take over,
Mm-hmm.
So
do you feel that same way about CNC machining, or is this more based on the design side, the art, the emotion?
Well, so I think CNC machining is important for sure. It has its place. And one of my close buddies, he came and took one of my metal shaping classes and has since left his office job and started a CNC shop.
Oh,
and
cool.
We have a blast. And what he's doing is combining old world, like glass fired enamel badging with modern CNC milling. It's amazing, the work he does. So he makes the badges for my cars. Just
no way.
Yeah, short distance from my shop here. So I think there's definitely a place for the CNC machining, and yeah, it's important.
What else do you think the craft is lacking today with the advent of modern technology? Like, is there something you're like, I really wish we had XYZ, or I really wish people would focus on this area over here? Like, is there a hole in the industry right now that you think could be filled?
Oh gosh, it's kind of I don't want to sound jaded when I answer this question, but there is this element. I think people's expectations, we're so used to, again, the computers and the AI now that's taking over. Like when you go on Instagram, you see these images and you're like, whoa, that's amazing. Oh, a computer made it. Somebody clicked a few buttons, but a computer generated it. And I don't know that I'm so much disappointed in the AI as much as I am that people don't value what it really takes to make things, to make art, to draw, to paint. Like there, and it's sad because people are almost okay with it. Their attention spans are like, 20, 30 seconds and they're on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And so stuff like this, what I do, I don't know, man, it's, hopefully there will be people around in 30, 40, 50 years that still appreciate it, see the value in it, to be able to support it as a craft and keep it alive. But it's not looking so good.
Like, how many hours go into a hand-built car?
The Roadsters typically take me about 2,500 hours. Mm-hmm. And the coupes are anywhere from like close to 4,000, over 5,000 on the Veleno, the Viper build. Yep. That was way over 5,000 hours.
And are you just talking body specifically, or from conception to on the road?
Conception to on the road.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of human hours. Like that, people don't understand. Like when you walk down to the dealership and you buy a new pickup truck, like that pickup truck went down the assembly line and it was built in like 19.7 hours. And if it was 19.9, it was slow. And if it was 19.7, you're right on the money. But like, we're talking like, for you, this is like a year, 2 years, like 3, like depending on how long this plays out. You really have to sink your teeth into this build. And when you say like there's a soul and there's a heart and soul in your cars, I mean, like, you mean it. You eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff.
Oh yeah. I've had this conversation in the shop recently. I can look at the builds and remember exactly my kids' age, what they were doing around the shop. Each build to me is like, it's a period of my family's life and me trying to make this work, and the struggles and the triumphs that go along with it. I think it's impossible to dedicate yourself to something on this level without it being a part of you and imparting, a part of you into it.
What are some of the biggest challenges when you go through the progression of these builds that you had? Like, what were some of the toughest parts?
Oh man, earlier on, it almost seemed as though like the thing I mentioned about getting harder on yourself as you get better, you get more picky.
Yeah.
That's something I struggle with on a daily basis. Like it's really, really hard, and you're trying to look at the best ways to do things and, you know, better yourself. One of the more recent challenges, we've been featuring our builds on the YouTube channel, and at this certain point recently in the build, we took from the body buck that we had CAD designed and basically rendered in the computer. We took the body work from the buck and went to fit it to the chassis, and it didn't fit.
Oh no,
Didn't fit. No, way off, way off. And after 2 years of working on this, so for me, like my frustration was off the charts. So I had to just kind of step back and be like, okay, well, I've done this on most of my other builds, just kind of going from scratch, freestyling. So I had to basically massage this whole thing, bring it in, get it to fit to the chassis, rework it. And then now we're trying to pull manually, like I've done before, pull templates from the reworked bodywork, go back to the buck, and I'm just going to take a saw to the buck and start cutting it apart and rebuild it by hand. So,
you know what though? Like it's some of your skills from earlier in your career when you're trying to bootstrap it and figure things out, and like it's some of those skills that you're able to leverage now and say, oh yeah, I remember that time that I built this, you know, this vert ramp or this whatever half pipe in the barn of the thing. When I use the saw, we're gonna use that same skill. We're gonna do it here, but just on a car. It's the same but different, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's another part of how it comes in. Those skills come in handy. You know, when you're kind of self-taught, and you know you grew up on a hobby farm and had to make things work, but still trying to pursue this level of finish and excellence that you know, people look at and see as something of value. You know.
Yeah. In terms of wood bucks, why do you prefer a wood buck over a metal buck or a wire form?
Yeah, so I did use the aluminum tube bucks from the third build all the way through, well, my most recent, even the Leno.
Yeah.
So I was shaping all of the buck just freestyling without any guides really. Just get the chassis, start, you know, bending up tubes and step back and look at it. And then I had a couple orders come in for the same car. So I said, okay, let's scan one of my existing cars and build digitally render a wood buck from that and have it CNC routed. So that's what we did with that one I was just describing. And thinking that we would have a perfect wood buck to build off of. And it would allow me to build my internal paneling, all the support structures off of that buck as well. That was another part that was so frustrating about it not working, because now all the internal paneling that I had planned on using the buck as guides for, I have to make from scratch.
Wouldn't fit. Oh no.
So there's benefits to both, I think. In more of a production, if you're doing multiples, I think having a really good wood buck, and traditionally in history, that's what they would do. The coach builders who were going to build like 6 competition cars, all the same, would use a wood buck. If you're just doing a one-off, then the wire buck or the tube buck makes sense. And yeah, I go back and forth on it now. And now we're going back to the aluminum tube buck most recently after what we experienced with the wood here. So
are they harder to modify, or in your opinion, are they easier to modify if you bump into a situation like you had?
The tube allows you a lot of flexibility to, you know, just cut something off, reshape it, come back. And I mean, I changed a cam. One of the RSs originally was designed with a cam tail, just this, you know, lopped off tail end, and redesigned it on the fly, made cardboard shapes to make a nice rounded long tail sort of, and then used the cardboard as a guide for the tube and welded up the whole tail end that way. So it's very, it gives you a lot of versatility.
Yeah. And why, I got to ask, why the carpet under your Englishwheel? I love the carpet under the Englishwheel.
Yeah. I kind of like a lot of my shaping is done on the floor. Like I lay my panels on the floor, and my old shop, there's just we live on gravel. There's so much dirt on the floor that making it, because I leave my cars raw, if you put those panels on the floor to like flex them and pull them and push them,
they get all destroyed.
They get so destroyed. So that's one of the reasons I have the rugs, is primarily just to work off of. And then I just like having the Englishwheel also aesthetically. It's like you're stepping into this,
it's like you're in the living room.
Yeah, this little zone that's its own special place.
It's so cozy. I think I'm going to adopt it here. I'm going to put a Chris Runge carpet underneath my wheel or something.
That's so fun. And just I get a lot of crap about that, but they were all on clearance. They're not real Persian rugs. They're all on clearance at Menards or one of the hardware stores in town. So.
It's the bougiest fabrication shop in all of Minnesota. It's imported. And
yeah.
Too funny. In terms of your workshop, you just built a beautiful workshop a couple years back, right?
Yep. Yeah. I bought the property at the end of 2018, built it primarily with friends and family. My dad being in the construction industry, just framed up this whole thing and just a few miles from my house. So I never would have imagined I'd be able to work in a place like this, but moved in January of 2020 and just been hustling ever since.
Nice. And I'm sure you just, for those couple of years, just like lock yourself down and just built stuff. Just like head down, do nothing, or what? Like, that's it?
Yeah. It's funny because my like family and stuff would come visit during all the different events that went on in the last couple of years. They're like, dude, your life really hasn't changed much. I just go to the shop, work, and go home, So thankfully, I got to continue to just do what I love to do. And, everything kind of stayed status quo for the most part.
It's a nice commute, a couple miles from home.
Yeah. Yep.
I guess balancing family and business, that could be a challenge if you've got a long way to go. But in your case, I guess that would be of benefit.
Yeah. It's been pretty handy. And now, my son and daughter both have helped out. My son's working full time. He's here working right now. So that's been nice. Then my wife does all of the ancillary goods, like all of our T-shirts that we sell and keychains and furniture. She ships all of that. So it's a family business.
Do you prefer doing furniture over cars?
I love doing furniture.
Yeah,
absolutely love it. Yeah. I think so. The beauty of the furniture is that you get a client, you get to make their dream come alive through the furniture, and it's maybe a month-long process. Typically, it depends on what we're building. It could take longer than that, but compared to 2.5, 3 years sometimes with the cars, it's really nice to have a project start and finish within a couple months' time.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, you got to go real long with a car, but a piece of furniture, it's like, okay, the end is in sight. Like, by the end of summer, by the end of fall, we can make this so.
Yeah. And then just the stress that comes with the car, all the safety components and everything that goes into it. With the furniture, it's a little bit easier.
If you fall off the chair, it's okay. It's your fault. You'll be all right. Yeah. Let's roll this as we wrap this up. Let's roll this into Chris Runge, the businessman, versus Chris Runge, the artist. How do you balance the two?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's very difficult. The first thing that comes to mind is that you just don't take a lot of things personally as the businessman. The artist, early on, I think, especially when you start to realize you're making art and it's a very vulnerable thing, you can be sensitive to it. And as you become more confident, and I think you move more into the business mindset, you're just not as vulnerable. You're maybe still vulnerable, but you're not as sensitive to criticism. I think as you establish the plan and the vision of where you want to head, you only allow certain people's input necessarily. Like a lot of the chatter that you get, through social media and stuff, that you just don't listen to a lot of that anymore. You listen to people who are important to you, people you admire, people who you are inspired by, and you listen to your customers.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, they're the ones paying the bills. I mean, that's what matters.
Yeah. And the cool thing with this is that my customers also listen to me because they want to buy, they're getting a piece of the story and a piece of my vision and the art. So, and I take that with a huge amount of responsibility, like again, the word excellence comes to mind and making every piece different slightly, or even majorly different than the last piece. So there's so many elements to that art versus business,
Yeah.
that you kind of juggle and have to balance out. Yeah.
Man, this has been so much fun. You've got this like James Dean suave, like if I could picture James Dean in a set of Wayfarers, in like a 1950s Porsche, as he was most noted for, your cars have that era to them. You have that era to you. You just seem like a very kind, genuine individual. And the fact that you're able to do what you love as like a legitimate family business and like reproduce all of these beautiful dreams and aspirations that you have, I think is truly fantastic. So from this side of the mic, from me to you, thank you so much for being on the show. Where can people find out more about you and all of the things that you have going on?
Yeah. Well, and thank you for all of that. I appreciate it. So you can track me down simply Googling Rungi cars, Runge cars. It'll bring up most of my social media. I have the Instagram, Christopher_Rungi, if I remember right. Facebook, if you type in Rungi cars, you'll find probably my personal account and the cars there. In the YouTube channel, we're always pumping out neat content and a lot of instructional stuff too. Just featuring how we're building the cars and ideas and the hardships and triumphs as well. So
awesome. There you have it. Mr. Chris Runge, thanks so much for tuning in to the Sheet Metal Shaping Podcast. Don't forget to like, share, follow, subscribe, and of course, tell a friend, and we will see you on the next episode.